for a couple of more minutes and then start. Okay. Hi. So today I'll be giving an overview of whatever has happened in week 2, following which I will discuss some of the old assignment questions. I'll just share my screen. Please feel free to stop whenever there are any questions. Just um, sorry. Okay, I'll start with discussing whatever has been taught in week 2. Uh, so, uh, the definition of biomechanics is uh, the study of structure and function of biological systems using tools of mechanics, and uh, it comes under the subdiscipline of kinesiology. Uh, Basically, it's a study related to internal and external forces acting on human body and its effects produced by other forces. Now, biomechanics is divided into multiple subdivisions, as is mechanics. The rigid body systems include static systems, and dynamic systems. And these dynamic systems are further divided into kinematics or kinetics, depending upon what final output you are looking at. Furthermore, there are other systems such as deformable solids, in which usually stress and strain are looked at, or fluid mechanics. The To describe whatever movement the particular problem or a particular scenario is going through, there is an anatomical reference position for it, which is the position of reference for all the movements, and the anatomical position is such that The human body is standing erect, hips and knees extended outwards, head facing forward, eyes open and looking directly forward, mouth closed, arms down, palms facing forward, feet parallel together. This is the base reference position uh, around which all the movements are gauged. Now the key terminologies are so these are some of the anatomical relations. There is the whatever is up is called superior, and whatever is towards the feet is called inferior. Not necessarily these two extremes, but anything in between. These are relative positions. Similarly, whatever is towards the forward of the torso is called anterior, and towards the back of the body is called posterior. Uh, the superior position can also be called cephalic. The opposite of that is the caudal position, which is near the caudal bone or the tailbone of the body. Um, some more directions. The left side is the medial direction and the right side is the lateral direction. Uh, whichever, so this particular line can be called the midline of the body. So whatever is closer to the midline is at the proximal position, or the towards the center of the body is called proximal, and whatever is away from the center of the body is called distal. And again, if there something is on the surface or the skin of the body is called superficial, and away from the surface or towards the center of the body is called deep. Regarding sides, movements can be either unilateral or bilateral. Unilateral meaning only happens on one side of the body, bilateral meaning happens on both sides of the body, left and right. Ipsilateral means happening on the same side of the body. If something is happening on the left hand and something is happening on the left leg, it's called ipsilateral. Whereas contralateral means something that's happening on the opposite sides of the body. For example, a movement in the left arm and the right leg. Now coming to anatomical planes. So imagine a XYZ plane. So XYZ coordinate system. So these anatomical planes are one of the surfaces, either XY plane or YZ plane or ZX plane, and there is one axis which is perpendicular to these planes. And these terminologies will help you describe what kind of movement is a particular scenario. So there are three planes: sagittal plane or the medial plane, which divides the body in left and right halves, not necessarily equally, but there should be a left half and a right half, left part and a right part. There is the coronal or the frontal plane, which divides the body into front and back, and there is a transverse or horizontal plane, which divides the body into a top half and a bottom half. Now the sagittal plane or the medial plane, uh, which divides the body into left and right parts, passes through the anterior posterior axis. Uh, and uh, the next is the coronal plane or the frontal plane, which uh, is which divides the body longitudinally perpendicular to the sagittal plane. It divides the body into front and back portions, and it passes through the left right axis. Sorry, is there a question? Is there a question? Can you shut off the... Okay.
அவன் பார்த்தான்டா சொல்றான்.
Can you, excuse me, can you please shut off the mic? Never mind. Okay. Sorry. Coming back. Next is the transverse plane, which divides in top and bottom portions. Basically, it's the it passes through the left right. It's in line with the left right axis and with the anterior posterior axis. Okay. Now there are again three anatomical axes, like three anatomical planes: the longitudinal or the craniocaudal axis, which passes through the top of the body, the left right horizontal or frontal axis, the anterior posterior or dorsoventral axis coming from the back to the front. Left right is from left to right. Craniocaudal is from superior to inferior position. Repetition of that. And then coming to movement. So the sagittal plane divides again the body into left and right halves, and and this is in line with the anterior posterior axis. So whatever the rotations are, they will happen. So the axis that is perpendicular to this plane is the mediolateral axis. So whatever rotations happen will happen about the mediolateral axis. If there is an axis drawn like this, then the rotations happen about that axis. There are two major movements that occur in about the mediolateral axis: flexion and extension. Flexion meaning the decrease in the angle between the body parts, and extension meaning the increase in the angle between the body parts. If this was considered to be a straight line, flexion, so this angle is decreasing, indicating flexion. Whereas if you are straightening the leg and this is the reference line, extension implies increase in this angle as indicated here. Two of the exceptions in this case is dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, which is specific foot movements. So dorsiflexion means movement of the foot to in the upward direction towards the calf, whereas plantar flexion means the movement of the foot in the downward direction. Remember, all of this is happening about the, so all these movements are with respect to the anatomical reference position. The anatomical reference position would have been the mid position. Next, coronal plane movements. Again, there are so the coronal plane divides the body into front and back halves, and uh, the axis which is perpendicular to the coronal plane is the anterior posterior axis, which passes from the back to front. So all of the movements that happen in this plane happen about the anterior posterior axis. There are two major movements in this plane: abduction and adduction. Abduction is when, so this would be the midline of the body. Okay. So abduction is taking the limb away from the midline of the body, if you are taking your hand away from the body, whereas adduction means taking the hand towards the body, or the limb towards the midline of the body. Similarly, if you were to move the leg away from the midline, the imaginary midline, then it will be abduction, whereas getting it closer to the midline would be adduction. Again, exceptions in this scenario, or majorly names which are different in the coronal plane movements, is the radial deviation or the ulnar deviation. So the bone which is near the thumb is the radius, whereas the bone which is near the little finger is the ulnar bone, or the ulna. So if the hand is, so these movements will be in plane with the coronal plane. So if the hand is moving such that it's coming to closer to the radius, it's a radial deviation, whereas if it's moving such that it's the little finger is coming closer to the ulnar bone, it's the ulnar deviation. Some more movements: elevation and depression. In elevation, in which the movement happens in superior direction, and depression, in which the movement appears in inferior direction. There is also inversion or and eversion, which is specific to the foot of the human body. Inversion means if you are tilting the board tilting the foot such that it's closer towards the midline. Eversion, away from the midline. Okay. Coming to transverse plane movements, which is the plane that divides in the body into top and bottom halves, and the axis in line with this plane is the anterior posterior and left right axis. The axis which is perpendicular to this plane is the longitudinal or vertical axis, or the craniocaudal axis. So if if there is a movement in this plane, it's about the longitudinal axis. So four major movements: medial and lateral. Medial is the inward movement in which if you were to twist your foot towards the midline of the body, or towards the center of the body, that would be a medial rotation. Whereas if you had to twist the foot away from the center of the body, that would be a lateral rotation. Again, uh, specific nomenclature for the hand and the forearm movement is when you twist your arm such that uh, the radius rotates of the ulna, or the palm is facing the posterior or the back side of the body. That's a pronation movement. Uh, uh, Supination refers to when radius and ulna are parallel, or the movement is such that the palm is facing the anterior, the front of the body, then it's called supination. There is one more movement which is sort of a culmination of multiple movement types: flexion, abduction, extension, and adduction, which is circumduction, in which you are uh, twisting your forearm in a circular fashion, which results in a conical trajectory of the body segment. This is a complex movement in which four different uh, individual movements are combined. Okay. Now, coming to muscles and their functions. So, muscles are the inherent biological motors that would exert the force and produce mechanical work. Uh, these muscles are coupled with tendons, and these uh, so basically the muscles will produce the uh, uh, force, or exert the force, which will be then transduced to the bone through the tendons. uh, there are other functions of the muscle, such as thermoregulation, heat production, uh, body sense, which is maintained by muscle receptors. But for the sake of this course, we'll just be looking at how about the movement, or uh, uh, the movement and the orientation of the muscles. So, again, muscles are of three types in a human body: cardiac muscles, which are present in the heart; smooth muscles, which are in the digestive tract, which is not under voluntary control; and skeletal muscles, which are present in the bones and basically help in the movement of bones uh, and limbs. Uh, so, uh, the skeletal muscle is designed such that there are these muscle fibers. uh, uh, the basal layer of the of a skeletal muscle is the muscle fiber. Multiple muscle fibers come together to form a fascicle, and multiple and there are multiple coverings within these muscle fascicles: perimysium, which is the outer covering; endomysium, which is the spacing between individual muscle fibers; epimysium, which covers the whole which covers multiple fascicles to uh, make a skeletal muscle, a big muscle of sorts, and and these the epimysium plus the muscle fibers or the muscle fascicles will connect to the tendon, which will then connect to the bone. um, Remember, the origin is the proximal site of the attachment, whereas the insertion is the distal site of the attachment. So if there were so if this is the upper forearm sorry, and this is the lower forearm uh, of sorts. So if there is a muscle in between these two lines, the origin would be in the upper forearm and the insertion will be in the lower part of the forearm. Okay. Okay. So, even within the skeletal muscles, there are different arrangement of the muscle fascicles, and depending upon the arrangement of the muscle fascicles, there are different types of muscles. There is fusiform muscles, which is spindle shaped, which uh, which uh, is usually observed in the biceps. uh, this is the origin and this is the insertion, and the middle portion is called the belly. So these fusiform muscles are spindle, they can be parallel or spindle shaped, and um, there are pennate muscles. So we'll come to more about that in a bit. But pennate muscles can be unipennate, bipennate, or multipennate, depending upon how many angles are there in the muscle. Uh, and then there are parallel muscles and circular muscles. Circular muscles are usually observed in the mouth region and help in chewing. And there are conversion muscles, which are observed in the pectoralis or the pecs. Okay. Now, how the muscle fibers are arranged within a muscle uh, dictates how much force is produced by the mm, by the muscle to and is transmitted to the bone. So each of the muscle fibers produces an individual uh, force, and these forces sort of culminate, and the forces are transmitted across the tendon to the bone, and which results in the final movement. Uh, the major types that we saw are fusiform, unipennate, bipennate, and there are other forms as well. So, how do you decide how much force is applied, how much force is transmitted to the bone finally? So, in case of fusiform, in which the fusiform muscles, in which the central fiber is shorter and the which is basically spindle shaped, the central fiber is shorter and the peripheral fibers are slightly longer in size. If you were to lay them straight, um, in that case, so there are two terms that you need to be aware about. the physiological cross-sectional area and the anatomical cross-section area. The physiological cross-section area is the cross-section area of the cross-section perpendicular to the long direction of all the fibers. So the direction of all these fibers are here, so the area that is perpendicular will cut across this muscle. The anatomical cross sectional area is anatomical cross section area might be different because it will. So for fusiform muscles it's the same. Uh, the the physiological cross section area is equal to the anatomical cross section area, because the anatomical cross section area is when you cut across this particular line. However, in case of unipennate or bipennate or pennate muscles, the muscles are arranged such that uh, all the muscles are connected to an internal tendon, which is the aponeurosis, which is also called the aponeurosis. The aponeurosis then connects to the external tendon. So this portion would be the external tendon. And whatever forces are generated by the muscle fibers are first transmitted to the aponeurosis, and then the aponeurosis is what transmits the forces into the external tendon. For in case of the in case of unipennate muscles, the physiological cross-sectional area will be this. So basically all the fibers are aligned like this, and the perpendicular to this would be the physiological cross-section area. However, the anatomical cross-section area will be this, because it's perpendicular to the muscle direction. It's not muscle fibers but muscle direction in general. So the anatomical cross section area would be this. So in this case, the physiological is not equal to the anatomical cross section area. And similarly in case of a bipennate muscle, the physiological cross section area or PCSA is this, whereas the anatomical cross section area is like this. Okay. So therefore, whatever forces are generated within a fusiform muscle are all transmitted to the external tendon because of how they are arranged. Whereas whatever forces are generated within the muscle fibers of a pennate muscle, a unipennate or a bipennate muscle, the forces that are produced are not necessarily all transmitted to the external tendon. So uh, if there is a force generated like this, the force that is actually transmitted to the external tendon will be like this. So essentially if the angle that the uh, fiber makes with the horizontal, it would be theta, then the force that is essentially transmitted is F sine theta. The maximum would be 90 degrees. The theta can be maximum 90 degrees, which would be the case for a parallel muscle. Therefore, for a parallel muscle, the force generated will be equal to the force exerted finally. Now coming to the contraction of skeletal muscles. So muscle contraction usually results in variation of in force and in length. Sometimes it can be one of these, sometimes it can be both. So there are two major types of contractions: isometric contraction, in which uh, the muscle tension changes, the force is produced, but there is no change in the muscle tendon length. So by muscle tendon, it means uh, the tendon that is attached as the at the origin, plus the muscle in between, plus the tendon that is attached to the distal side or the insertion point. So if you were to suppose hold a heavy weight in a constant position, that would be the isometric contraction condition, in which the muscle itself is contracting, or if the length of the first tendon is L1, if the length of the muscle is L2, and the length of the tendon that is close to insertion point is L3, then L2, the length of L2 decreases. However, the L1 plus L2 plus L3 stays constant. So basically either L1 increases, L3 increases, or both increase. The second time is the isotonic contraction, or in which the force that is generated within the muscles remains the same, but the length of the muscle changes. Uh, these are of two types, either eccentric contraction or concentric contraction. In eccentric contraction, the muscle tendon length increases, and in case of concentric contraction, the muscle tendon length decreases. Uh, Eccentric contractions usually happen when the tension produced by the muscle itself is more than the load of the external load, and the movement is downwards, whereas uh, uh, a concentric contraction, in which is a condition in which the load produced by the muscle is is more than the external load or external force. So now coming to, so pennate muscles has something called as a pennation angle, in which is the angle that is that dictates how much force is transmitted finally to the external tendon. So just to reiterate, in a pennate muscle, all the muscle fibers are attached to the aponeurosis or the internal tendon, and these internal tendon is what connects to the external tendon. So basically, internal tendon will collect all the forces generated by the muscle fibers and then transmit it across to the external tendon. Whereas in case of a fusiform or a parallel fiber, the muscles itself themselves will transmit the forces to the tendon, which can then transmit the force to the bone. So in case of pennate muscles, there is a pennation angle which comes into play, the which is basically the okay. The pennation angle is the angle between the muscle fibers and the line of muscle action, uh, or the aponeurosis. So basically, this is the uh, pennation angle in this case. Depending upon what the pennation angle is, the force transmitted will be different. So if you consider theta as the pennation angle, then the force finally transmitted will be the force generated by the muscle fibers into cos theta. The theta can be 0 in case of parallel muscles, and therefore the force transmitted will be equal to the force generated. And there in case of a unipennate muscle, there can be multiple tendons attached to the muscle, and therefore multiple aponeurosis that are attached to the uh, tendon, are attached to different tendons, and that will dictate what kind of forces are finally transmitted. Again, the pennation angle can in a human body varies between 0 to 30 degrees. However, it may not be uniform throughout the muscle. The pennation angle can change either with age or with strength training or muscle hypertrophy. With age, there is a decrease in pennation angle because of muscle atrophy and basically loss of muscle. So the uh, number of muscle fibers in a muscle decreases. The major point of pennation or pennation is that you can squeeze more number of muscle fibers into a particular muscle, therefore generating more force. However, with age, the muscle fibers atrophy, and with that, because there is more space, the pennation angle decreases. Uh, and in case of strength training, there is muscle hypertrophy, in which more number of muscle fibers are added onto a particular muscle. Uh, since there are more number of muscle fibers added to the squeezed into an already crowded muscle, the pennation angle increases, so that the final force transmitted remains the same. Uh, However, the pennation angle that you would observe in a particular scenario A might be different from a particular scenario B, even within the same muscle, because the pennation angle is specific to a particular case, a particular problem which you are looking at. So, during joint movement, the angle changes. Excuse me, one second. So, we have been talking about muscle fibers, but the muscle fiber itself is not the basal unit. It's a basal unit of a muscle, but muscle fiber itself has other divisions. Uh, Within the muscle fiber is a sarcomere, which is the basic unit, functional unit of a muscle fiber. Now, so basically, uh, a sarcomere uh, is considered to be, if there was a electron microscope image of a muscle fiber, the sarcomere is considered to be within the Z disc, within the first Z disc to the second Z disc. The uh, Z to Z length is considered to be a sarcomere. So this the muscle fibers have alternating thick and thin bands. The thick band is rich in myosin, whereas the thin bands are rich in actin. These uh, uh, actin filaments are connected to the Z disc through titin proteins, and so basically there is an interaction happening between the actin filaments and the myosin filaments, which causes which we'll be looking at in future, a power stroke of sorts. So the actin filament, the myosin filaments will pull across the actin filaments, and there will be a sliding motion of sorts, which generates the power stroke, and that is how, and each sarcomere generates such a force, and that is how the force is generated within a whole of a muscle fibers and then transmitted. So thick filaments myosin, thin filaments actin, and um, the protein that's joining, the protein that's joining the thick filaments to Z disc is the titin protein. Um, okay, so uh, there, so this is the uh, root movement of sorts that happens within a muscle fiber, but the movement that happens within this muscle fiber comes from somewhere else. The decision is made somewhere else in a neural net, a neural in suppose in a spinal cord. The spinal cord then transmits the information to a neuromuscular junction that is near the near this particular muscle. The and this particular process is called a excitation contraction coupling. The excitation comes from the electrical signal that is being transmitted to the neuromuscular junction, and which is further transmitted to the muscle cell, and this is the cause. So the decision is made somewhere, and the electrical signal is relayed from that position, and the final result is the contraction of the muscle, which is a mechanical event. So the process itself is quite complex. The There is a depolarization of the junction, which results in uh, results in the synapse near the neuromuscular junction has vesicles which have acetylcholine in them, which is the neurotransmitter transmitter, which is going to transmit the information. Yeah, there is a signal and the muscle needs to contract. So this is basically a chemical signal. So there are vesicles in the synapse which will get released, uh, released to the neuromuscular junction, and in the muscle cell there are uh, within the muscle cell there are receptors sensitive to the acetylcholine. Uh, so and these receptors are so the acetylcholine basically acts as an ligand, and the receptor is a acetylcholine gated ion channel. So once acetylcholine binds to the receptor, there is a flux of sodium ions inside, causing depolarization of the membrane, and this creates an electrical signal of sorts, which is then relayed throughout the muscle uh, membrane, or the uh, sarcomere's plasma membrane. Influx of the so the depolarization event essentially creates a event such that the DHPR or dihydropyridine receptors are activated, and the food processes, or the tail end of the dihydropyridine receptors, are near the ryanodine receptors. These ryanodine receptors are present on the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So basically there is a link between the uh, plasma membrane of the sarcomere to the sarcoplasmic reticulum across the sarcoplasm. Towards the plasma membrane side is the DHPR, and towards the uh, sarcoplasmic reticulum side is the ryanodine receptors. So the the electrical impulse that comes up, the action potential that is generated, starts the uh, DHPR, which then kickstarts the ryanodine receptors, which are responsible for outflux of calcium ions uh, from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum always is rich in calcium ions, because it has a protein called as calsequestrin, which can bind to 18 to 50 calcium proteins, uh, and this protein is specifically present within the sarcoplasm. So upon signal from RYR, the calcium ions that are present within the sarcoplasmic reticulum are released to the sarcoplasm, and so this is what causes a calcium spark. All of this happens across transverse tubules, which are basically gaps between two sarcomeres, like uh, troughs between two sarcomeres of sorts, like these. And the DHPR RYR system spans across this near the transverse tubules, not near the plasma membrane, which is near the neuromuscular junction. So the calcium is out, causing a calcium spark, which will then result in the uh, contraction finally. But once the calcium is out, is it going to be wasted? No. It's going to pump back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum once the work is done. How is this done? There are calcium, so like there are calcium, there are channels for outflux of calcium. There are pumps for influx of calcium. So channels don't necessarily need a energy component to them, whereas pumps have an energy component to them. So uh, in general, pumps across any membrane utilize some sort of energy currency. In case of calcium pumps, the energy currency is ATP, which is converted to ADP, and there is a loss of a phosphate group, uh, and this generates energy which is used to flux the calcium ions from the sarcoplasm to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. But pumps always use energy to do this, whereas channels may or may not use energy. Uh, and the generation of these ATP ADP groups finally results in movements in the actin and myosin network, and which is how the force is generated within a muscle cell. Okay, any questions till now? Are there any questions? Okay. uh, I will discuss some of the old assignment questions. Okay. So the first question is, which of the following statements is correct about in describing the anatomical position? Remember the first slide. It's a erect standing position. The palms face forward, arms down the sides, feet parallel. So the answer is all of the above. Choose all the statements that are correct. Pelvis is caudal to shoulder, neck is superior to chest, ribs are superior to the stomach, chest is inferior to the pelvis. So this is the diagram that you should remember. Uh, the pelvis is caudal to the shoulder. Pelvis is to the caudal side, it's near the tailbone side, and the shoulder is here. Uh, so, in the pelvis to pelvis shoulder um, arrangement, it's the cephalic caudal axis that we are looking at. Again, neck is superior to the chest. In a, so neck is towards the superior side, so this is also correct. Ribs are superior to the stomach. Ribs are superior to the stomach. Chest is inferior to the pelvis. Chest is actually superior to the pelvis. So A, B, C are correct and D is wrong. Which of the plane divides the body in anterior posterior section? This is the diagram that you want. So anterior posterior meaning front and back. So to reiterate, coronal plane front and back, transverse plane up and down, sagittal plane left and right. So the answer is coronal plane, which divides the body in anterior and posterior section. Which of the phrases correctly completes the sentence? Medial plane A passes through the body longitudinally, divides the body into left, right and left sections, passes through the anterior posterior axis, or all of the above. So the sagittal or the medial plane passes through the body longitudinally, divides the body into left and right sections, and passes through the anterior posterior axis. The anterior posterior axis is in line with the plane. So the answer is all of the above. Next, transverse plane divides the body into anterior posterior section, front and back section, superior and inferior section, or left and right section. Transverse plane up and down. So the answer is superior and inferior section. Excuse me. So the always remember, these planes won't divide the body into equal halves. It's just a relative superior section and a relative inferior section. The division can be here in the chest region or here at the knee region. Okay, next question. The imaginary axis passing from the left to right direction is A mediolateral axis, B sagittal axis, C frontal axis, and D anterior posterior axis. The answer is mediolateral axis, left to right, or frontal axis. Sagittal axis is this, and anterior posterior axis is perpendicular. Which of the following describes abduction movement? Movement of the limb towards the midline, movement of the limb away from the midline, movement of in the superior direction, movement in the inferior direction. Its abduction is movement of the limb away from the midline, whereas adduction is the movement of the limb towards the midline, if this is the midline. Okay, next question. Which of the following are coronal plane movements? A radial deviation, B pronation, C supination, D circumduction. So remember, coronal plane, okay, is this, okay, this, which divides in front and back. So so the answer is radial deviation, in which the movement of the it's the movement of the thumb towards the radius of the are inversion of the foot is about longitudinal, vertical, or anterior posterior axis. The answer is anterior posterior axis. Inversion of the foot is also a coronal plane movement. Therefore, the axis that is perpendicular to the coronal plane is the anterior posterior axis, and therefore it's about the anterior posterior axis. Last question. Which of the following are transverse plane movements? Circumduction, supination, pronation, or flexion? The answer is supination and pronation, which happens in the transverse plane, along the transverse plane. Okay. Are there any questions? Does anyone have any doubts as such? This is a forum to sort of clear your doubts if you have any doubts in week two's lecture. Are there any doubts as such? Or are there any doubts from week one lectures? If there are any, you can ask. I'll hang around for a few minutes. If there are any questions, you guys can ask. Otherwise, that's the end of the class. Okay, one more thing is that whenever you are, since I forgot to mention this, whenever you are talking about pennation angles in pennate muscles, so there are uh, so in case of there so depending on whether it's unipennate, bipennate or multipennate, there are there can be different pennation angles. In a unipennate muscle, the pennation angle will be these, like the angle between the aponeurosis to the muscle fibers. So there will be one pennation angle. Whereas in case of bipennate muscles, there will be two. There is one here and one here. Similarly, in case of multipennate muscles, there will be multiple, depending on how many directions the muscle fibers are aligned. So basically, need to remember that the angle between the muscle fiber, sorry, I didn't share the screen. Let me just share the screen. Sorry. Um. Okay. So, um, so in case of a unipennate muscle, uh, the angle will be this that forms, that is within the aponeurosis to the muscle fiber. Whereas in case of bipennate muscles, there will be two such angles. One is this and one is this. Therefore, depending on what, or if you were to draw a line here, one of the angles will be this and the other one will be this. So depending on what kind of muscle you are looking at, the pennation angle would be the number of pennation angles will be different. And one more thing that I forgot to mention is in case of excitation contraction coupling, in case of this won't happen in case of uh, skeletal muscles, but there are uh, in case of cardiac muscles, there are certain uh, L-type one kind of calcium channel called as L-type calcium channels, which basically causes the calcium ions can be present in the extracellular fluid as well, apart from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So in case of cardiac muscles, what happens is that the um influx of calcium ions also happens from the extracellular fluid to the sarcoplasm, basically resulting in a higher magnitude of calcium spark. This influx of calcium ions from the extracellular fluid into the sarcoplasm uh, on, sarcoplasm creates basically induces, first of all, induces more secretion of more outflux of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm as well. First off, there is more influx of calcium from the extracellular fluid, and then there is outflux of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm, resulting in a higher magnitude of calcium spark. And this particular phenomenon, in which activation of L-type channels leads to outflow of calcium channels from the sarcoplasmic reticulum to the sarcoplasm, uh, is known as calcium induced calcium released, or CICR. But this is only particular to the cardiac muscles. Doesn't happen in skeletal muscles. And smooth muscles have their own mechanism. Are there any other questions? Are there any questions or any doubts in this particular week or the previous week? Okay, if there are no doubts or any questions, this is the end of the class. Thank you, everyone.